Hello and welcome to Mythic Mind, where we pursue wisdom on the paths between primary and secondary worlds. I'm Dr. Andrew Snyder, and I'm glad that you're here. Hey there, and welcome back as we continue through the fiction and philosophy of C.S. Lewis, which is an independent course that I put together in the summer of 2024. So this time we're going to be introducing That Hideous Strength. Now, this episode is going to be a little bit shorter than normal, but if you are hungry for some more Mythic Mind content, then first of all, make sure that you're subscribed to our other podcast, the Mythic Mind Games and Mythic Mind Movies and Shows. And furthermore, I now have a brand new patron benefit for Tier 2 patrons and higher. If you're a Tier 2 patron, then now you can have access to my brand new online Intro to Philosophy course that's playing out week by week starting when this is released, actually. And so head over to patreon.com/mythicmind, become a Tier 2 member. If you're already a Tier 2 member, you should be able to find a link to that classroom over there. And so for the next, I think it's 13 weeks, we'll be going through a number of texts from the ancient Greeks up to postmodernity, and we'll be providing you with PDFs of all the readings, although we'll recommend some hard copies along the way, but all the readings will be available as PDFs. You'll have weekly lectures that introduce the text and that walk through them in a bit more detail. And so all that is available starting now for Tier 2 patrons. But for now, let's go ahead and get to the introduction to That Hideous Strength. Hello and welcome back. So we're going to get started on That Hideous Strength, which is really just an absolutely incredible text. It is a wild ride, as you already know if you've been through it before. And if you haven't been through it before, then there are some things you should know. First of all, you should know that this is going to be a very different kind of story than we get in Perelandra and Out of the Silent Planet. And that can really throw people off, and so just make sure you're aware of that. First of all, you should know that you're not going to hear from Ransom until about halfway through the book. A lot of times when people start reading this book and they don't find Ransom right away, they get kind of disappointed. They feel like this doesn't feel like a sequel to what they've been reading, where they've been investing. And so know that Ransom will show up, but he shows up a little bit later on. Also, you should recognize that it makes sense that this book is going to be very different than the other two, because the other two books take place in the heavens. They take place closer to the ideal of things. They take place in Mars, they take place in Venus, both of which are unfallen planets operating within the ordered spheres of the heavens. And so there's a very clear linear storyline, both in Out of the Silent Planet as well as in Perelandra. As Ransom goes through these various ventures, he has all these very particular experiences that eventually lead him upward toward a higher plane of reality as he moves toward the realm of being. And then in Perelandra, right at the very end there, we see that even this exalted realm of being that he finds himself in is just part of a even larger, more grand, more upward moving dance. And so he gets a taste that even these glorious realities that he's experiencing in the heavens are but part of a much bigger chain of being that leads all the way back to God himself. Now, in That Hideous Strength, we're moving away from the heavens, and the story is moving to Earth, to the Silent Planet. And remember that everything that happens under the sphere of the moon is given over to chaos, is given over to disorder. Things are not operating as they're supposed to, and so there's a lot more chaos involved. And that feeling, that chaotic feeling, is going to be experienced throughout your reading of That Hideous Strength, as there's a lot of mystery, storylines are kind of jarbled around, things tend to really just jump from one scene to another, and while there are some developing threads from the very beginning, there's not a clear linear sequence. There's a lot going on, there's a lot more chaos, there's a lot more disorder, and that's exactly what you should expect on this fallen planet that has removed itself from the order of the heavens. But that being said, there is some strong thematic continuity with the stories that came before. And so let's just review some of those themes that we've seen. And so in Out of the Silent Planet, when Ransom goes to Mars, he experiences the martial influence. And so Remember, he has this rough landing on a very hard planet, a planet that doesn't give way, a planet that doesn't receive, a planet that is hard, that is kind of unsettling to land on because of how much the planet asserts itself against you. And that is part of the martial spirit. The martial spirit is that which asserts itself against external foreign forces. This is the spirit of war, this is the spirit of combat, this is also the spirit of the martyr, all of which deals with this idea of asserting yourself against external forces, either in victory or in a noble death, which also is a kind of victory. As the influence that asserts itself, Perelandra then commissions Ransom to go to Venus, and Venus receives Ransom. And so this is a very different kind of landing scene that we see in Perelandra, as Ransom doesn't so much land on the planet as he does with Mars, but no, the planet receives him. And so Mars is concrete, Venus is more fluid. It's more warm, it's more receiving. And so Mars sends his agent into Venus, and as he does so, that Venus then gives rise to life. And so I kind of very briefly touched on this, that on one hand, yes, this is a kind of sexual imagery here. However, I keep emphasizing the point that Lewis is not a Freudian. In fact, he's very anti-Freudian, because while Freud is going to move his psychology towards sexual impulse, Lewis actually grounds sexuality in something more transcendent. He says in Perelandra that what we call sex is simply the organic instantiation of gender, which is a more transcendent, a more ideal reality that transcends even the biological. And this is why when he looks at Perelandra and he looks at Perelandra, he sees the ideal of femininity and he sees the ideal of masculinity, despite the fact that these are sexless angels. And so here we see the perfect instantiation of gender, which in a way that transcends the sexual. And then in biological organic life, the gender then comes into the form of the sexual. This idea is directly tied into some of the ideas that we see in Myth Became Fact. The idea that ultimately all stories are stories about the true story of the gospel, in which Christ the masculine is received into the earth, and as he is received into the earth, that then gives rise to new life. This is a theme that we see in the Ransom series. This is a theme that we're going to see in Till We Have Faces. This is a theme that we're going to see in the Narnia series. The idea that the masculine is received into the feminine, and then in that exchange, new life is born. And this is where That Hideous Strength is going to find its broad-scale context. I mean, note that the story begins with a struggling marriage between a man named Mark, who is, by the way, named for Mars, and Jane. And so as you read the story, as you read the beginning of the story, for this first week, I've sectioned it out to the preface through chapter 6. As you read the beginning of the story, I want you to note the relationship that Mark has with the martial influence, as well as the relationship that Jane has with the Venusian influence. And so note where Mark is particularly not concrete, where he doesn't take a stand against the forces around him, but where he simply receives the negative influences that are pressing upon him. At the same time, focus on where Jane is not warm, where she is not receiving, where she is overly concrete in the wrong ways. And so we see at the beginning of the story that Mark is going to neglect his relationship to the masculine, that is to Perelandra, just as Jane is going to neglect her relationship to the feminine, that is Perelandra. And so even though this is a very chaotic story, right, it's very sprawling, it's very disordered in many ways, the big story we're going to play out here, I'm sorry if this is at all spoilery if you haven't read the story before, but the big story we're playing out here is the reworking on Earth of the reality that already exists in the heavens. And that really isn't much of a spoiler. We've already seen the fact that Ransom himself is providing a kind of bridge between Earth and the heavens, the fallen planet Perelandra, and the planetary influences. Remember back to his dream in Out of the Silent Planet, when he is stuck on the wall with one leg out in the darkness, one leg in the known, in the garden. And so he's straddling, he's playing this priestly mediator role. And then remember in Perelandra, where he gets the name Piebald, because he's half dark and he's half light, continuing the same theme, that he is a transition point. He is going to be that which bridges the heavens and the earth. And Mark and Jane play their own analogous roles here to the reworking of the relationship between Mars and Venus. And so as far as introduction, I think that's probably enough to set you up for things to look for, things to be aware of as you start reading. Now, for supplemental reading, obviously I still recommend the 3 secondary texts I'm recommending for this entire series. But as far as That Hideous Strength, The Abolition of Man is really going to be a must-read here. It's a relatively short text, but it's fairly dense. Some people struggle with it a little bit, but I think that it's very readable, and it really lays out the philosophy for what Lewis is telling us through this story. And so I strongly encourage that you read this or listen to it on Audible or wherever. And I've mentioned that I intend to put out a video for it as well. This Abolition of Man, because it is nonfiction, it's not core reading or anything like required reading for this class, but it is important. And so I'm going to try to put out a video on this before we're done with Ransom, before we're done with That Hideous Strength. So I'm hoping to get it out next week, but definitely before the end of the series. For shorter reading, I'm recommending 2 essays up front, although as we move forward through this text, I'll probably recommend some more along the way. But one of them is called Questions and Answers on Christianity, and this is found in God in the Dock. This is exactly what it sounds like. It was a forum where people were asking Lewis questions, and he was responding. And a number of these question and answers are relevant for That Hideous Strength, especially when he gets into evolutionary philosophy and philosophy of science and that sort of thing. And so that's definitely worth a read. Another essay, which I would call a must-read, is The Inner Ring, which is found in The Weight of Glory. And that's all about the temptation that we have to strive to be on the inside, to be on the know, to be in the center of things. And remember from the end of Perelandra that we very often get the center wrong, but nonetheless we have this desire to be in the center. And so the inner ring is going to be really important as you follow Mark Studdock's journey. But I think that's good as far as the introduction goes. Next time, we'll get into the weeds a little bit from the preface through chapter 6. I hope that you enjoy this incredible story, whether you're reading it for the first time or you're reading it again, and I really look forward to our live discussion. Until then, Godspeed. Thank you for listening, and special thank you to all patrons. And by name, I would like to thank all my Tier 3 patrons and higher. So many thanks to Mark, Aaron, Amanda, Andrew, Chase, Chaz, Christopher Clinton, David, Don, Aaron, Evie, Adam, Jack, Jamie, Justin, Kit, Kyle, Paul, Roger, Ross, Tyler, and William. All of you, as well as all of my patrons. Right now, we're up to over 70 patrons, and you all do so much in helping me to keep doing things like this. There are 3 different podcasts. I'm putting together new courses to offer, all the various things that we're working on with Mythic Mind. If you would like to support my work, then head over to patreon.com/mythicmind. As a reminder, Tier 2 patrons get access to that Intro to Philosophy course. And if you become a Tier 3 annual patron, then you get everything that Mythic Mind has to offer, including any of my courses that begin within your term. And so right now, if you sign on as a Tier 3 annual patron, then that's going to include the Elder Scrolls and Philosophy coming up this fall, the Silmarillion at the beginning of 2026, the Psychology of Soren Kierkegaard in the spring of 2026, and probably one more course, though that's undecided at this point. The next thing that will be coming out on the freebie feeds will be over on Mythic Mind Movies and Shows with The Revenge of the Sith. So I'll talk to you then. Until next time, Godspeed.